I'm just feeling celebration tonight. Celebrate, don't wait too late. No, we don't stop. You can't stop. We're gonna celebrate one more time. One more time. One more time. Celebration. Know we're gonna do it right tonight. Hey, just feel it. Music's got me feeling the need. Yeah. Come on. All right. We're gonna celebrate one more time. Celebrate and dance so free. Music's got me feeling so free. Celebrate and dance so free. One more time. Music's got me feeling so free. We're gonna celebrate and dance so free. One more time. Music's got me feeling so free. We're gonna celebrate and dance so free. One more time.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to Hashflow's Basic Degenomics, a weekly Twitter Spaces conversation where we invite those who are actively shaping the future of DeFi and the crypto industry to share their alpha. Today is episode 29. We've got Justin Vogel, co-founder of Safari Club, the #1 destination for Web3 growth leaders to exchange tactical insights. Justin, why don't you introduce yourself before we get started with our conversation?
GM, good to be here. Thanks for having me. So I'm Justin, co-founder of Safari. As mentioned, we built the #1 community for Web3 growth leaders, consisting of heads of growth from Ledger, Sky Mavis, even Hashflow, and 150 other Web3 companies. Our community is a global network promoting the ethos of collaborative growth, and members share their strategies, challenges, and tech stacks in private community sessions. And while we started as a community, we're now also a tech company solving Web3 measurement and attribution. And our privacy-centric platform went live a few months ago and is already being used by some of the largest DeFi companies. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're crushing it. That's why we're excited to chat with you. And look, man, just dive in a little deeper on the Safari Club. Like, what prompted you to start it? What was the overall mission with your organization?
Yeah, so, I dove into Web3 in 2021 and was immediately fascinated by the potential for new business models and freedom from the very powerful intermediaries of our time. But as someone who spent my career in growth, I was also dumbfounded by the insane growth of all these brand new crypto startups, and even more confused by the fact that it seemed like hardly anyone was talking about how exactly they were growing and why they were growing so rapidly. And so what I really wanted to figure out was, what does growth look like in this moment? And this moment was, the end of 2021. A lot of Web3 growth leaders, the more growth leaders I spoke with, they understood that the tides had begun to shift, that things were quickly changing when it came to the strategies that they were able to use in the height of the bull market. And they knew that sort of the music was going to stop. And so a lot of people were thinking about, well, what's next? How do we do sustainable Web3 growth today? And so we really realized that, one, people needed to come together and talk about their growth strategies and challenges together. And two, we realized that a lot of growth leaders didn't know each other at that time. And I think that that's still the case here, that a lot of growth leaders still need to meet each other, and that through more growth leaders knowing each other, that will enable them to be really successful and grow the space overall. So the original intention for us of building Safari was, connect Web3 growth leaders together and have them share their insights so that we can grow Web3 together.
100%, man. And definitely, the shift in strategies was a necessity. Even today, right? Like creating the same content around NFTs and Web3 probably wouldn't get the same traction that you would have gotten, even just a few months ago. So definitely an important part. And the fact that you guys understand that is probably the reason that you guys are still crushing it even today. Look, we had a poll as well that we shared this week. And, we asked some questions to what people wanted to learn about, and growth marketing came up. And, you've built this community of incredible growth marketers. What have been the most significant things that you've learned from them?
Oh man, it's so hard because we've learned so many things over the past year and a half. Let me think about this for a second. I mean, from the earliest days, it was really fascinating, right? Like, so we're going back to early 2022. All these growth leaders were trying to figure out, how do we respect the Web3 ethos while also collecting the data that we need? And so at the time, people were wondering, like, hey, we have a Connect wallet, but is it okay to ask them for their email after they connect to their wallet when they sign up, or not? Or just leave it as is? Or ask them for other things, or ask them a little bit more about themselves. And so I think that these are fundamentally still many of the questions that the Web3 growth leaders are struggling with today is, we need to onboard, we need to get data, but what is, with the Web3 ethos versus what is like to Web2? We also learned a lot about, what tools would be needed to be built. In early 2022, that was before the big wave of Web3 marketing technology that we've seen to date. Now there are well over 250 companies building in the space, but back then I'd say there were dozens, maybe low dozens. And so we have some that were really needed to be built, and others that were maybe too theoretical and have still struggled to find their footing today. But I think one of the most significant insights that I've learned seeing growth leaders and meeting them over time has been, like the macro Web3 space, growth strategies really move in cycles. So somebody hears about the success of one company's referral program or their advertising campaign or quest, and then next thing you know, all the Web3 growth leaders are doing it, and then on to the next one. So it's kind of funny. We've seen this. I feel like I've seen this most acutely with quests. Like 9 months ago, quests were like all the rage. Everyone was doing quests and everyone was really excited about them. Then people kind of got disenchanted with quests and we're like, this is all vanity. We're not, into this anymore. And then like loyalty programs really came onto the rise, which is funny because like loyalty programs are fundamentally a quest. And so people got really hot on loyalty programs. Now quests are back again. And now I'm starting to hear more and more about ambassador programs, which are also, again, kind of like a quest fundamentally. So I think that there are sort of narratives in themselves about growth strategies, which growth strategies work over time. And that's been one of the most interesting things for me to see and continue to learn from Web3 growth leaders about what's popular now, versus what's actually working.
Yeah, definitely, man. I remember that conversation bridging the gap between Web 2 and Web 3. Like, I don't know how many pitches had that sentence on the slides, but that was all the rage back in the day. And, you talk about how fast the space moves. We're basically F1 drivers, man. It's just unbelievable. One day is just an incredible amount of time in this industry. And just kind of furthering along with this question here, what traits do you see the most successful members have in common? I mean, I know Andrew's a member, so you guys must be good at curating this crew. But what have you kind of noticed from your most successful members? Like, what do they kind of display regardless of the market?
I mean, I think in terms of successful members, it all comes down to a willingness to learn. Fundamentally, Safari is a learning community, so you get out what you put in. As I was mentioning before, we have a community ethos to foster collaborative growth. So members that are more collaborative, I'd say in some ways are more successful than others. Those that are willing to share their strategies and challenges and tech stacks with each other, both in one-on-one conversations and private sessions. They certainly get a lot out of the community. We've also engaged in a bunch of writing these days. So 20 of our members have co-written growth playbooks with each other, and even co-hosted Web3 growth events and dinners around the world. So I think that there are a number of different elements that come into Safari, but it all comes back to what I said before. Like, Safari is a place to meet people and learn from other people. And so if you're doing both of those things, then you're probably a successful member and also getting out of the community what you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's a good call. I mean, unless you're not human, it's basically impossible to keep up with everything in this space. I mean, there's so many projects releasing, right? There's so many people even entering the space. You just need people to kind of help you, and I think having that collaborative spirit is definitely an important one. So, I kind of want to ask you this about as well, right? You've learned a lot about community building. If you were starting over today, how would you approach it differently? Like, if you were starting from zero, like, what are the best tips that you could give people?
Yeah, I think that, well, I'll answer this two ways. I think that we're really blessed to have fallen into a strategy of doing batches of our community. And so batches for us means we let in a new group of members every 4 to 6 months. And so this strategy essentially enables us to approach each batch differently. So we do get to both lean on the things that we learned on the past, but also start over, in a sense, with a new group of people with things that we have learned or haven't learned. But I'd say that I'd say like the more direct answer to this question is, I think that I would start Safari in a very similar way that I did before, to be perfectly honest. I didn't know that this was the best strategy at the time, but from seeing what we've learned batch over batch, I think that we honed in on a powerful strategy early, which is, it's very simple, right? I think a lot of people really overcomplicate their community. They think, oh, I need to have like 1,000 people in my community before we can get off the ground, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. And what Safari really started as was, as I mentioned back in end of 2021, it was just, I had conversations with 10 different growth leaders, so a small number, right? We're talking about here. And then I did a FOMO style application drop of saying like, hey, we're starting the first Web3 growth community, and you have 7 days to apply if you're interested. And we were trying to figure out from there. We said there are only going to be 40 slots in our first batch, and if you're interested, apply. And we had far more than 40. We were very excited to see that. But I think that to like scale and bring people back is like, talk to 10 people and create a community of 40. I think 40 is a good number, but maybe even 20 or 30 could be a good number to start with, and really try and curate the vibes and figure out what people want to talk about, or what they're interested in from that first group of 20 or 30. Because I guarantee you, if you cannot make a community work at 20 or 30 people, you're not going to be able to make a community work at hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people. And a lot of the, just like a company, and they say this for a company, right? For companies, they say your first 10 employees will make or break you. I think that the same is probably true for a community. Your first 40 members are probably going to make or break your community. And so, if it breaks, then you have an opportunity to stop and try again with a new group of 40. But if you make it, then your community will probably look very similar to that first group or that first batch for us. And that's been the case for us. Our first batch was, members, there was about 20 Web3 growth leaders, about 10 Web3 founders. It was a few crypto VCs and a few what we call corporate innovators who are like head of Web3 at Web2 brands. And they're people from all over the world. And so had we built our community differently, say like, all founders in San Francisco, our next batch probably would have looked like, well, mostly all founders in San Francisco. And so it depends on what you're looking for. But I think that we were fortunate to lean into a diverse community with some diverse segments from the beginning. And we've been able to maintain that over time because each of those members shares with friends from their network, all these people come from different networks. So I think that that's made us a bit more resilient. So yeah, in conclusion, I'd say start small, talk to 10 people before you start your community, start with a small group, figure out what they really want, and ideally try and make that initial group quite diverse as well.
100%, man. I mean, scaling culture is a very tricky task. You have some of the largest companies in the world who fail to accomplish that. In terms of batches for the future, if somebody wants to get in on Safari Club, how should they be positioning themselves today to get into the recommendation?
Definitely. So we primarily look for two things. One, are you actually a Web3 growth leader? As I mentioned before, we explored a lot of different segments over time and tried to understand what is each segment's motivation for joining our community. But this might come as like super obvious, but Web3 growth leaders, like heads of growth of Web3 native companies, tend to get the most out of the community and also tend to be able to provide the most value to the community. There are all the other segments, like Web3 growth leaders, VCs, and heads of Web3 at brands, primarily want to learn from Web3 growth leaders, but don't necessarily always have their own, stories and experiences to offer, or their own challenges, to be frank, right? Like being a Web3 growth leader, as Andrew knows, is a hard fucking job. It is very, very fast paced. There are all sorts of challenges. A lot of different Web3 growth leaders struggle with very similar things. They're largely talking to, a technical focused audience and even a technical focused internal team that might not really understand marketing as well as they do. And so the environment in which we're doing growth and the teams in which you're doing growth with look very, very different than they did in Web2. And that can be really hard for a lot of people. So I'd say in a number of ways, Safari is also kind of therapy for fellow Web3 growth leaders. But yeah, to scroll back to your point, I think that the best growth leaders are the best applicants for us are one, they're a Web3 growth leader, like that's actually their day-to-day job. Two, they come from a community they come from a company that we don't have in our community today. We have a couple hundred members that represent a couple hundred Web3 companies. And so for the same reason that I mentioned before, our experience becomes more rich the more diverse we are. So meaning we try to limit the number of people that come from each individual company. So if we don't have one of your colleagues in the community today, that will definitely make your chances a lot higher to being able to join. And so that's kind of it, right? We look for interesting backgrounds of growth leaders, interesting companies that are solving interesting problems. But I'd say also with companies, we're not necessarily looking for the Dapper Labs of the world. We're also looking for the companies that most of you haven't heard of before, because actually the smaller companies have some of the most unique growth challenges, and they'll come up with the most unique growth strategies to solve those challenges. Once you're a larger company, you can't experiment as much, you move a lot slower. Growth looks a lot different. It looks a lot more predictable, like it looked in Web2. And so we actually find that the most interesting and the most sophisticated growth leaders often come from companies we never heard of before.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, man. I think also a certain mind is drawn to the opportunity that this industry is offering right now. It's a Web2, will probably be there for a long time. So those opportunities will probably exist for, a little longer than some of these that have exponential growth. And, it's just kind of continuing on the Web2 conversation. We talked a little bit about bridging the gap between Web2 and Web3. You've mentioned, Web2 a couple of times. How is growing a community in this industry different from trying to grow one in Web2?
Alan, I don't know if it was your internet, but I missed it, or if it was my internet, but I missed the end of your question. Can you repeat it again?
Oh, yeah, of course. Can you hear me?
Let me switch off my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, technical things, dude. It could definitely be me. I'm not trying to blame you, so I'll just keep talking. So just in case you can test if you hear me or not.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you much better now. I think it might have been me.
Hey man, this conversation has too much alpha. The Twitter gods don't want it to happen, but we're gonna power through. I was kind of asking you, how is growing a community in this industry different from trying to grow one in Web 2?
So I've actually done both, surprisingly. Back in 2018, my first job out of college, I was building a community of developers on Discord for a mock interview tool for software engineers, which was a very different problem space, but ironically kind of similar. I had never used Discord before at that point in time. But to scroll back, I'd say, honestly, I think it's largely the same to start a Web 2 community versus a Web 3 community. What I would say, though, is, I think that a lot of Web 2 growth and a lot of Web 3 growth and Web 2 community and Web 3 community are exactly the same when it comes to the principles of growth. But the things that are different are the channels are different, the tools are different. So those types of things are different, but I think the fundamentals of growth don't really change that much. So like fundamentally, for example, when we were building, as we were saying, Safari is a learning community for growth leaders who want to learn about Web3 growth. The community that I was building before was a community of developers who are all practicing mock interviews together because they wanted to get a better job and accelerate their careers. So fundamentally, I'd say these two communities actually are quite similar, even though they're completely different segments in completely different industries. They both have two things in common, which I think are really fundamental to any community. One, you have to be very specific about who the community is for, right? So on one hand, we have a community of Web3 growth leaders, and on the other hand, we have a community of developers. And because that community, it's clear who it's for, people enter the community that don't know each other with something in common from the get-go, which I think is really, really important for a community. It's you either share a role, a place, a hobby, something else. I think is really key to building that early culture and finding common ground, which is key for communities. And then two, they have something to do together, right? So in the first example, it was mock interviews. They both had the same goals as well. They had the same role and the same goals. And they had the same method to achieve those goals, which is they were practicing mock interviews on our platform. They were like doing a lot of data structures and algorithm questions on LeetCode, which is another site, and so on and so forth. And they were really just trying to accomplish their goal. And I think the same is true in Safari. They're trying to accomplish the goal of being great at their job. And they need to talk to other people to be able to be great at their job. They can't just be great at Web3 growth in a silo. So I think that is the same, and the same can be true for an NFT community, right? People are really care about the same community and they want to see that community grow, but they also want alpha on, what are the other communities that they should be joining, or, what are the types of things within that community that they should be doing so that they can level up. I think that there are really fundamental truths about community that don't change from Web 2 to Web 3.
Definitely think that's a very fair take, sir. And speaking of the other communities, besides Safari, of course, which is crushing it, who's done the best job? Who's cultivated the best community? It could be Web 2 or Web 3, like as a reference point, so maybe people can go check out for themselves if they're trying to build one. What examples of a good community would come to the top of your head?
I think there are two ways to take this. I think that, the best Web 2 communities are probably things like religious groups and other things of that nature, really strong and tight-knit for many of the same reasons that I mentioned. People come in with the same goals, they have the same, like lifestyles. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from religion. I think on like the tech side, I would say we start with community, but eventually we're trying to level up to an ecosystem, people that share the same sort of like DNA fabric for their roles and other things. I think the company that's done that the best is Salesforce. They have like a whole little world of their own with like Salesforce Dreamforce conference. I'm calling it from San Francisco, where like usually like their Dreamforce conference is the only thing that like completely warps all of San Francisco. You have like San Francisco is a lot smaller than people expect. It's about a population of around 800,000, but Salesforce Dreamforce drops like 250,000 people into the city all in one go for a week every year, especially before COVID. So like completely madness. So that's one piece, right? Like people just are like Salesforce obsessed, but also like there's all these certifications and skills they need to level up, and you have entire people that like their job is Salesforce administrator. And I think that sort of is like the best possible example of like communities and micro communities of people who are leveling up their careers by using the product and getting certifications around the product and meeting people who also use the product across the world. And so that's, in my mind, a great example of like a community to aspire to on the company side. But I will also, maybe this is like a hot take too, for how we think about Web3 is, I don't believe the communities are necessarily forever. They might be really powerful in a certain moment in time, like I personally think, excuse me, like product market fit, I don't think the community market fit lasts forever either, or at least it can definitely lessen. That is, if the market changes, and we know that the market changes a lot of Web3, then that community might not have a reason to exist anymore. And I think about this a lot for Safari too. Right now we're definitely still in a moment where it's the wild west. Web3 growth leaders really need a space to come together and learn about each other and get to know each other. But it might not. But Safari might not be a community that needs to last forever, right? We might either innovate into a new need that future growth leaders have that current growth leaders don't have, or we might say, Safari was a great community for a certain time in Web3's history, and we can move on, knowing that was the case. So I think that, maybe this is controversial, but I think that communities, like products, like other things, don't need to be forever, and we shouldn't have to think of them that way either.
Look, man, that's definitely, I think you're probably right. And I think, honestly, the market chooses sometimes for you whether the community is going to exist or not. Also, people, the attention span, right, is just so, the new shiny object syndrome is, threads came out, everybody dumped Twitter for a week, and now they're back. So, you just kind of have to understand the human psyche as well, which I'm sure you do. And look, man, those examples, Salesforce, and then, the church groups, I would not have guessed that you would have shared those, but those are very, very, pretty accurate, honestly, in terms of community building. So definitely some interesting alpha there. And, let's pivot a little bit to some platform specific questions. So the platform formerly known as Twitter, right? X, that's where most of the community is on these days. What have you learned about the Twitter algorithm that can maybe help people optimize their social approach for 2023?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really hard. I've noticed some differences with the Twitter algorithm. But it really feels like the Twitter algorithm just like completely breaks every now and again for like a week or so in the last like few months in particular. For example, actually, I think the Twitter algorithm is broken right now, and it feels like it broke last Thursday. So for us, for comparison's sake, Safari is active on our company Twitter, like the community Twitter, and then on my personal LinkedIn. And what I typically do is I schedule posts that go out to both of those channels with the same content. And so, I use Typefully. It's very, very useful for that. And we have around similar audiences on both of those channels. So as far as Twitter has like 10,500 followers, my LinkedIn has around 9,000 followers. And I'm just giving these stats to say that these are completely different platforms, but with similar audience sizes. And very typically, it's actually quite strange, but maybe this is just the nature of content. These two channels, these two platforms, personal versus Safari, same content, tend to perform very, very similarly on average. So similar number of impressions. So I'm wondering how similar, different platforms, content algorithms are to each other. But that wasn't the case at all lately. So for example, on Thursday, we posted on LinkedIn a post that got 77 likes and 10,000 impressions. And on Twitter, it only got 10 likes and 1,000 impressions. So it literally got like 10x the reach on LinkedIn than on Twitter, which is pretty interesting. And Friday we saw the same. We had a meme post that we did. I've never posted a meme on Twitter on LinkedIn before, but I was like, let's see how this goes. This is more like the Twitter style. But again, LinkedIn got like 50 likes and 2,000 impressions. Twitter got 8 and 300 impressions. So it was, like also a night and day, like 6-7x difference between LinkedIn and Twitter. So I'd say that one, I think things get broken and then they get fixed again. I don't really know I have zero data to back that up. But my hunch is actually that content on Twitter is getting shown now for longer, like more days than it did before. In the past, you'd put out a post, and if it didn't get significant traction in like the first 20 minutes, that was it, basically. Like your post was not going to get shown to more people, and you were unlikely to see any additional traction. But now I think it's drawn out that period over a number of days. So your likelihood of going viral might be the same, but Twitter will continue to show your content to people over time, even if you don't go viral. So that's something that I'm noticing right now. But I think that, like what we're saying about communities, I think the fundamentals remain the same about what type of content hits versus doesn't hit. So for example, Safari is a company that sells a platform. And when we look at like Web2 companies that sell products, typically they just show their product all day long, every day. And honestly, that's not the type of content that most people like or give a shit about. People really want content that helps them personally. And I think a great parallel example is I saw a banking startup that they could talk about how they give better returns than yada yada than other banks, and etc. But they very consistently posted content on their Twitter that is trying to help founders with different things. So they did a post like, hey, we hired a UX designer for the day. Post your websites and we'll give you we'll have our designer send you back feedback on how to improve your website. So that has literally nothing to do with this banking product's actual products, but their target segment is founders who are probably opening up a bank account for the first time. And they found that post just went completely viral for them, right? Is founders were chiming in, being like, oh, cool, yeah, I would love help with my website. And then they learned about this banking product as a result. And I think that we take a very similar approach with Safari, is when we think about B2B products, people and you and probably everyone on this panel probably has somebody trying to sell them something all day long. And then on the side, they're like, hey, so we're trying to sell you this product, but in case you're curious, we also have this content that you probably care about and a podcast you probably care about and a community you probably care about, but we're not going to tell you about those things. We're just going to tell you about our product. And so we take actually the opposite approach, right? And we say, hey, we have a product. If you're curious, go find it. You can learn more about it. But we're going to tell you about our community, which we know you care about, our content, which we know you care about, and our podcast, which we know you care about. And so I think that that's sort of a big difference too when thinking about content that hits, is really think about your audience and nothing else, and the good things that you want to accrue to you for your platform or your other things that you're trying to upsell. I believe that those things will organically come if you are providing a high quality content that your audience actually cares about.
Damn, dude, so many good points in there. One, what you said earlier about the algorithm is definitely correct right now. It seems like content has been elongated versus instant activity. I post a lot of memes, used to delete them within 5-10 minutes if they don't get a certain activity, and now it's I'm telling you, they literally go viral 24 hours later. So just be patient on that front. And then you talked about LinkedIn as well, man. And LinkedIn just kind of seems right now like attention arbitrage. What you post on there's just not that many people posting quality content, so you have a better chance of rising to the top. What has your experience been with LinkedIn recently, and do you think people should be focusing more attention there?
Absolutely. I think that people have been sleeping on LinkedIn for the longest time, and that would be I keep telling people about this, and they they don't do it. So it continues to be, as you're saying, attention arbitrage for me. I never really posted on, I was like most people, I never really posted on LinkedIn. I never had a Twitter before I entered Web3. But I've grown my audience on both tremendously over, the last year-ish plus. Before I had like 2,000 followers on LinkedIn. Now I have over almost 9,000. And I don't try very hard on LinkedIn. What I do is I literally post all the things that do well on Twitter go onto my LinkedIn. So I'll do like one post a week, basically. And that's been enough to significantly grow my following. And I also see I get a ton more attention, a ton more views, more likes on LinkedIn typically than Twitter. So yeah, I think a lot of people are sleeping on LinkedIn. A lot of people in Web3 are on LinkedIn to lurk like everybody else, lurking, not posting content, which is great because attention arbitrage. So yeah, I think a lot of people are sleeping on LinkedIn as a channel for sure. But again, it has to be like relevant. And I think that the good thing about LinkedIn too is, when we go back to thinking about algorithms, is people actually, quick clarification here for LinkedIn. I think that posting from a company LinkedIn is not very valuable, but if you have people that post from their personal LinkedIns on behalf of the company, I think that is a winning strategy. And the good thing about that is you are more human and thus more trustworthy, and the people who know you will like your content, whether it is average or whether it's amazing. And I think that helps you in the algorithm find people who think that your content is amazing on LinkedIn in particular.
100%, man. I mean, quality of impressions on LinkedIn versus Twitter too. I mean, you talked about getting 70 likes on LinkedIn, which is literally like getting 500 on Twitter. I mean, that's pretty good. Pretty good post right there. And then if it goes turbo viral, that's awesome. But the leads that are on LinkedIn as well. Just I just post memes and people are like, yo, these are funny. Like you should come make memes for us. Like, okay, this is kind of crazy. Like you said, dude, I just like take the memes that do well on Twitter and post them on LinkedIn, and it's literally free attention right now. But yeah. And it does continue also some of these more platform-specific questions. Twitter isn't the only platform for marketing. We've talked about LinkedIn. What learnings have you gained from platforms like Discord? How do you approach these different platforms, and how do you kind of alter your content?
Yeah, Discord is so. As I mentioned before, I've only ever run communities in Discord. I actually adopt a very similar brand voice in Discord as I do on Twitter. I'd say I largely don't alter it too much. Discord, the key for us, which I think we really got successful through the batching strategy, is when somebody joins your Discord, if you have an open Discord server and they don't see something that provides them value, and probably honestly like the first 90 seconds of them being in your Discord, they are gone forever. They're never coming back, and you just lost them. And so I think that that's another thing that we sort of lucked into with our batching strategy, right? Is in a traditional server, you might be joining that server at an odd time when the server is not particularly active because you're in a region of the world where it doesn't cater to, or that's not what the server is all about, or you don't find somebody that's interesting when you first jump in. And that poses a problem for really most communities. However, if you have a batching strategy like we do, then you're jumping into the server at a time when everyone else is jumping into the server. And so naturally, a very small community can look significantly more active than any other very large community. And we do this intentionally, right? We say to people, hey, you've been accepted into Safari, you're this group of 80, and you have to join Safari's Discord and join our community in the next week and a half. And if you don't, then we basically lock you out and you can apply again for the next batch in 6 months, right? So it's sort of it is a pressure strategy, but it gets people to do the action that we care about and join at the time in which there's the most excitement, which also sort of furthers the value in people's mind of like, wow, this is really great community. It's much more active and engaged and has interesting people than any other community that I've been in before. And that is partially true. We definitely curate our members strategically, but it also is due to the way that we onboard them in the process of how we design that experience.
Yeah, I mean, Discord's an interesting one. You know, in terms of like the funnel of customer acquisition, do you kind of find Discord as one of the first platforms that potential customers kind of go to when they're kind of scouting out a product, or is it Twitter? Is it their website? Like, where's kind of the first set of eyeballs going to get a review of a company?
I think it really depends. If it's B2B, I'd say probably their website. If it's B2C, I'd say probably their Twitter. And then from there, people sort of find the place that they're most likely to end up. For a lot of B2C communities, obviously, that's exploring their Discord and seeing what the vibes are and figuring that out. For us, I think that most people find out about Safari, and we also have the data to back this up, on Twitter or LinkedIn. And then from there, they go other places. And so that's really sort of a neat experience to learn more about us. But yeah, I would say that those are the two, and those are the paths that we tend to see people take.
Definitely good to know, man. Yeah, if you can nail the Discord vibes, that's quite a tricky thing to do, but if you can do it, it's quite useful. And let's also just dive heavily into Web 2, man. Let's talk about email. What about email? It's been around for a while. Some people think it's dead. What's your thesis on email lists and marketing in this funnel?
So I think it also depends on whether you're B2B or B2C. My hot take is that for B2B, I think there are better opportunities elsewhere. I think that B2B, again, it goes back to in growth. You have to look around and say, what is everyone doing and what is everyone not doing? And are people not doing that thing because they don't know about it, or because they tried it and it doesn't work and it's not as good, or for some other reason, right? So for us, on the community side, we use Discord announcements and email over the past year and a half. We started to see that, the community, people weren't really on Discord as much. And so we recently migrated the whole community to Telegram, which is where most of our community is more active on a day-to-day basis. And that's been a huge early success. So we're still communicating with our community for important things over email, because it doesn't really get the same notification pop as Discord announcements. Though obviously a lot of people way overuse Discord announcements. We're very sensitive about that. It'll only send like one Discord announcement per week. Similarly, we only send like one email to our community either every week or every 2 weeks. So I think that the way that people use the channels that they have at their disposal is also changing. People for email, right? People would send their customers an email every single day. And I think that is dead. As soon as you rise to the level of like too spammy, or like I don't care about your content, then like you're out, right? And you've lost that person. So I think there's an intentionality that needs to happen. Though my hot take about email for B2B is, email is by far the dominant for B2B. As we said, you get a bunch of LinkedIn messages, but I get so many emails. And we even have like a complex email, like a weird email that you wouldn't be able to guess for Safari. But as soon as you're on a list, and everyone ends up on a list at some point in time, then like your email is like dead forever. And you're just going to get spam every single day like I do. And so for us, what we do to counter that is we actually use Telegram as our sole B2B channel. So when people sign up to Safari's Web3 measurement platform, we ask them for their Telegram. And we ask them for their email too, as a backup, because we want to see whether they're using like a work email and what their company, like that's a good way to verify their company domain. But we actually don't send them an email, or we haven't had to send anyone an email yet. What we do is we send them a message on Telegram. Say, hey, we saw you created an account. I'm here to help you. I'm the co-founder of Safari. Let me know, if you need help. And the reply rate is drastically higher than on email, as you might imagine, because it's a channel that people aren't using as much, right? So like we, for our first couple of weeks with the live product, we sent probably like, 30, 40, 50 emails out to people who'd created accounts. Got a reply for like maybe one, right? On Telegram, I send a message to somebody. I have a channel that pings me every time somebody creates an account. I send them a message as soon as I see it. I usually will get a response from like 70% of them. which is pretty crazy, right? So I just think it's a much more accessible channel. And like with what I said before, you have to think a little bit unconventionally. Is the reason why people are not doing something because it's wrong or because it's just a channel arbitrage opportunity, like what we mentioned with LinkedIn?
100%, man. I love Telegram. Big fan. I feel like, this could be just completely not true. I feel like it's a little easier to predict a scammer on Telegram than Discord. But maybe I'm wrong about that. And I know people hate emails as well. So when the, B2B goes a little crazy on emails, or B2C, that, it makes people a little frustrated. So definitely sparingly, like you said, one email every once in a while, one Discord announcement every once in a while is the way. But man, do these companies love their announcements, brother? Like, it is not easy to tell them to hold the horses there. Let's continue here with community building. You guys onboard a lot of people into this wild world of crypto. What is your strategy to onboard normies or novices without overwhelming them?
Yeah, I think that, to be truthful, we don't onboard too many Web2 growth leaders into our community. But I think that there is that alpha is really a fundamental to any community. There needs to be a benefit to join one community over another, in a way that community makes you better. And so for us, the way that we think about our community is, how can we accelerate the careers of our members who are growth leaders? And so we do accept Web2 growth leaders every now and again, who are curious about Web3, but who are not full-time in the space, just because we think that they have very interesting backgrounds that would be very conducive to Web3. And actually, one of these such people, as a great example, is the person that told Andrew about Safari. We had a member who was a Web2 growth leader, and we thought he had a really interesting background. He had a phenomenal content background. And we're like, this guy was like a lab made for Web3 growth, even though he hasn't dove into the space yet. And so he joined the community. He learned about Web3 growth. Now he's a growth lead at a Web3 company, and he worked with Andrew in the past at Andrew's last company. And he said, like, Justin, I brought up Safari in all of my interviews about where I got my Web3 growth alpha, and I think it really helped me get my first job. And even though Safari doesn't necessarily exist to get people jobs, I think that that's sort of a great example of people enter the community with a shared background, right? Again, for our community, that is people who both do growth. Whether you've never done Web3 growth before or know anything about Web3, it doesn't matter, because you're coming in with the same type of identity. And so I think that maybe that is where I would answer this question most directly and say that, communities should try and onboard other people. The easiest way to onboard other people is to onboard other people that you already have something in common with, in whether that's an identity or a role or something else. And that's the best way to, enter with the same common language and then move from there.
Yeah, man, Andrew is a legend. He just flew to Korea, and he's sick. It lost his voice, so he's recovering. But I can tell you, I've been working with him since March. He's the best boss I've had. I'm looking forward to working together in the future for a long period of time, because every day is actually a lot of fun. And you talked about alpha resources as well. I mean, look, man, everybody has an uncle who got a stock tip, or are in a group chat with some guaranteed 100x's. What do good alpha resources look like? Like, where do you go if you actually want to get tangible alpha and actionable alpha?
Oh man, it's hard. Would it be alpha if I told you on a Twitter space? No. But I think for me, it's really, I spend a lot of time reading different newsletters that Web3 growth leaders are putting out. And I have one for each different subject. So for example, the one I'll show is, if anyone's read T-Pan's newsletter, he writes a ton about basically what are the growth strategies that Web2 brands are doing in Web3, and is it working, and his analysis of it, and it's super fascinating stuff. And that's a world that, similarly to what I was saying before, I don't spend as much time thinking about what Web2 brands are doing in Web3 and what their strategies are. But T-Pan and I are speaking a common language, even though I'm just reading his content, not talking to him, about growth, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm seeing this in a lens that I understand, even though none of these examples are anything that I heard about before I read your work. And so that's one resource that I use to stay up on the alpha, the Web3 growth alpha, because it also gives me a lot of insights on how those strategies could be applied back in the more Web3 native world as well. And I think that that's where a lot of alpha comes in most. I think a lot of people look for alpha in their individual space or vertical and say, like, for example, like if you're, a DEX, like what are all the other DEXs doing? And what can I learn from that? But I think that some of the biggest alpha actually probably comes from like, what are like Web3 games doing to motivate their community? And can I learn things from those companies? And that's what we see actually a lot in Safari. There are certain strategies that we produced that other people were like, hey, that's really interesting. Do you think that it would work in a completely different vertical? And I was like, well, maybe not for certain different reasons. And they launched it like in the exact same way, and it hit in the exact same way. So that was like also surprising as well. So I'd say the best alpha is probably found from looking at what successful companies in verticals that you're not in have done before.
That's some good alpha, man. You don't got to reinvent the wheel. To look at the blueprint of what's worked for others, and maybe try and apply some of those learnings to your own project. And again, the newsletter from T-Pan, everyone, make sure you check that out. Name dropped from the Giga Chad Justin himself. So there must be some good alpha in there. And look, diving into growth marketing a little deeper. Data is obviously very important. What are the most significant metrics you track in this space, and what numbers are you focused on collecting and believe have actual value?
Yeah, I think that the channel is still very significant, figuring out what channel people are coming from. A lot of people are focused on isn't like Twitter the dominant channel? I mean, yes, Twitter is a dominant channel, but a lot of people get their growth from channels that they might never expect. And so being able to actually track which channels are driving results is really, really key. And I'll give a tangible example of that is that, we have things in growth marketing that is not as much talked about in Web3, I'll be honest, but what we call low intent and high intent channels, in that a low intent channel for Web3 might be something like Facebook. Like you could advertise on Facebook and you could get a very high volume of users, but those users might be not Web3 users. And so they might convert at significantly lower rates. So you might have like a really low CPC, like view cost, basically, of getting a bunch of people to see your product. But if none of them convert, that's a problem for you. Similarly, on the other hand, there could be very niche channels that you didn't even know that your users were coming from, that you want to lean into more, because you might say like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. There's like this blog article where, 10 people came and 10 people converted, versus like Facebook where like 1,000 people saw this and like 4 people converted. And you might want to lean into those types of channels. And that's what we see a lot time and time again with a number of people that use Safari's measurement platform is undiscovered channels. They might not necessarily have known about that they can lean into more or find audiences that really match them in. So I'd say channel is important. Tracking the right end of funnel metrics is also important. As I'm sure many people here are aware, Web3 was very geared towards vanity metrics for the longest time. That is very quickly changing. When I say vanity metrics, I mean like how many followers do you have on Twitter? How much engagement do you have on your posts? Yada, yada, yada. A lot of that was done with bots and other fake things. So, that becomes even more so vanity. But I think the truth of the matter is you need to tie that engagement, whatever those metrics are that you think are driving results, back to an end result, whether that's like how many swaps are done on our DEX or other types of volume metrics, and be able to see that from the Web2 marketing channel to the actual on-chain result is super, super key, so you know what's actually working and not what's driving just like bot views or what we call ghost engagement. A thing that we've learned as well is location is really important for a number of L1s and L2s, the ecosystems. Much more so than I thought. It makes sense now in hindsight, but location is important for L1s and L2s because they need to show builders who are going to build on their L1 or L2 that they're growing in high value areas and not just run by a bunch of bots, like coming out of Russia or something. So the more that they can prove with their data that they're growing, and B, growing in high value areas is really key. So yeah, in summary, location, channel, are some of the most important ones, and engagement insofar as you can prove that that engagement is actually driving the actions that you care about on chain.
100%, man. I mean, everybody's got good engagement before the mint, and then after reveal, it's a ghost town. And I guess kind of double clicking on this, we've seen companies and projects with large marketing budgets fail in this space. If you had a sizable budget, what is the best way to utilize it in an effective manner for this industry? Is it double tapping on those undiscovered channels and whatnot, like you were kind of saying, or how would you kind of use a large amounts of money in this space, like so many projects have done ineffectively?
I think there are a few different ways, and I think it largely depends on the type of project that you are. I think that there's one, we're still in an industry where, what am I trying to say? Market intelligence is key. So you definitely have an asymmetric advantage if you understand your market and the new projects that are coming out better than anyone else does, and be able to qualify them at significantly higher rates. So if you're B2B, this is absolutely key. One, being able to understand and pour money into, how can we see every single project that might want to use our product and qualify that they would be able to use it better than anyone else. On the B2C side, which I think is probably where this question is more geared towards, a couple different ways. Ads are tried and true. A lot of people I know have been hating on ads in Web3, but I think the reason why they've been hating on them is less so due to the ad, and more so due to less so due to the strategy, and more so due to like the ads themselves have been like pretty shitty. If we're being 100% honest, like the ads that you see on Twitter for like low-key scam projects, like everything looks like a scam, and that doesn't make anyone want to click on anything. And so that's what I would say. One, all these things, these strategies fundamentally are, you need to have good design choices for them. So like ads can work really well, I believe. Quests can work really well, because quests, if you do them in a right way, you're passing money back to your community, and that is like better than investing in ads. I think it's a little easier to design ads that convert today than quests that really convert back to the core metric that you care about. But nonetheless, these things are all about incentive design, and we're still all trying to figure that out together. So those are, I'd say, would be some of the channels that I think are most scalable today. What we hear with a lot of, even though I was like low-key hating on quests earlier, what we hear from a lot of growth leaders who are using our platform and also see in the data is like, on the whole, yeah, a lot of users that are coming from quests are low-value users, but there are still a significant chunk that come through that are high-quality users that they would have never been able to reach or find without using a quest. And so actually the return on ad spend or return on investment of doing quests does cover itself time and time again. So you get, if you pay $1,000, you paid, $900 for a bunch of users that gave you nothing, and then you paid $100 for, a bunch of users that brought you back like $4,000, for example. That's kind of what we see with quests. So ads and quests, I think, are the most scalable today, and where you can put the most budget behind. And then also, just asymmetric data intelligence, I'd say, is the last piece of the puzzle, which likely informs those two things as well.
100%, man. I mean, quests are, with the right value for users, right? That's important as well. Like, there's a lot of worthless quests that can be, very, very valuable. And look, Hashflow is dropping some quests soon as well, and I guarantee you those are worth your time to check out. And it's fun, man. Some of these vehicles, like I said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to kind of put your own spin on them and make them worth people's time, and we'll see the effectiveness. Look, man, we just got a couple more questions to ask you. We want to be respectful of your time. We've been going for about an hour. One of these last ones is, what parts of this industry currently have the most opportunities in your opinion? What are some skills that you're seeing that are most in demand?
I mean, obviously I'm biased here, but I would say growth. Every company, it's kind of funny, in the bull market, growth was not something that people thought about at all, really. And I was kind of alluding to that earlier, but the reason nobody thought about growth at all was because everyone was growing like crazy. Why would you even think about like your growth or marketing strategy? Because just whatever you did popped. But in the bear market, growth is the number one thing that is freaking everybody out. And so growth, I would say, if you can prove that you are driving results back to the core metrics of the company that you're working for, that is very, very key. So I'd say this kind of comes back to, now we're like in a weird hybrid, right? So like Web 2 was all about very data-driven performance marketing, which wasn't valuable at all over the last couple of years in Web 3. Web 3 is much more geared towards content and community. And honestly, it's sort of just like spraying and praying and hoping that organic growth is going to drive growth of your company. And now we're like in a weird hybrid land, to be honest. Those things are still very important and drive a significant amount of growth, much more so than performance marketing, but you also need to be super data-driven about it. And that's what people are installing right now. So I'd say it is a combination of get to know the channels that matter. We talked about them here: Twitter, LinkedIn, niche channels that you might not know about yet. And then 2, be able to use data to tie that back to show that those channels are actually driving results, is really the key of where we're at right now. And if you can do that effectively, you will have no problems getting any job in Web3 if you can show that you did something and it drove results.
You heard it from the man, the growth wizard himself. He's telling you what you guys got to do. So if you want to work in this industry, you just heard it right there. Last question we have for you, man. What does the rest of 2023 look like for you? Where will the majority of your focus be?
Like any early stage company, any early stage team, things move very quickly for us. So thankfully, as I'm looking at this, we only have 3 months left of 2023, even though I probably move in like 4-week cycles. For us, on the immediate time horizon, as I alluded to before, we are launching the 6th batch of the community. That is, for us, an all-encompassing moment of time. So it'll take about a month for us to, or about a couple weeks for us to like fully launch. And then it'll be very intensive for a couple months after that. But the majority of our focus, to be honest with you, will be continuing to onboard dozens of teams to our Web3 measurement platform, which helps companies measure their results, as I was talking about before. Adoption's been really swift so far, since the industry has needed something like this for so long. But now it's really about helping more and more teams accelerate their growth on the tech side, like we've done on the strategy side over the previous year and a half.
100%, man. Look, we're big fans of you, Andrews, obviously, in your community. And, we look forward to seeing what you guys do in the future. And, I'm sure we'll be having you on the spaces down the road as well. Look, Base Degenomics is brought to you by Hashflow. We have conversations with industry leaders and alpha chats every Thursday at 12 p.m. ET. Justin, we appreciate your time, man. This absolutely flew by. We had a lot of good conversations in here. I'm glad this is recorded. Are there any final words that you have before we depart, sir?
No, just thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in and listening. This was a lot of fun, and thanks, Alan, for producing such great questions as well.
Hey, man, it's a team effort, brother. We appreciate you being an awesome speaker. Everybody, make sure you give Justin a follow, give Safari a follow, give Hashflow a follow. And look, man, we're big fans of you and excited to see what you guys do in the future. So everyone, much love. Weekend is almost here, and we'll be chatting soon. Justin, again, we appreciate your time, brother. Peace out.
Thanks. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.